have tonight. I was going to call it a sutta. It's not really a sutta. This is from a section of the Dhammapada. Some of you have heard of the Dhammapada. The Dhammapada, taken in its whole, is a rather long poem, but with a lot of very significant smaller sections in it. And so this is a section from the Dhammapada, which is part of the book that I mentioned the last couple of weeks of the Khuddaka Nikaya, the fifth book of the Pali Canon. And this is another teaching on restraint. And the Buddha is using the example of an awakened, fully mature monk to describe a well-integrated Dhamma practice. And it kind of goes to Frank's question last week, or statement about how to integrate the Eightfold Path. This is a description of how an Eightfold Path is integrated into your life and the results of it. It speaks to, like all the Buddha's Dhamma, it speaks to dependent origination and Four Noble Truths, but specifically to greed, aversion, and deluded thinking. It teaches emptiness as the Buddha teaches emptiness, to be empty of ignorance. And it teaches how this monk fully integrated the Eightfold Path by avoiding some of the pitfalls that were common during the Buddhist time and are just as common today, meaning engaging in rites and rituals as part of a Dhamma practice. It's okay to engage in rites and rituals when you recognize it's simply not part of the Dhamma, much like you might do anything else. The Buddha begins, skillful is restraint at the eye, at the ear, at the nose, and at the tongue. We talk often about practicing restraint at the sixth sense base, the five physical senses, and that sixth sense, thinking, consciousness, but it's thinking rooted in ignorance of Four Noble Truths. And of course, that's how we experience life, isn't it? And so if our point of view is rooted in ignorance, not having an understanding of the way things truly are, the contact is going to be interpreted from that point of view, isn't it? And so the Buddha teaches us how to go from that wrong view, a view rooted in ignorance of the way things are, to a fully developed right view, which simply means seeing things in the moment as they occur without any need for them to be any different. And that's the big challenge for anyone who has, we talked about this a little bit earlier, anyone who has created the strong aversion to dukkha, which really is a strong aversion to life. We simply accept things as they occur. Why? Because they're occurring. Because we don't have a choice. It doesn't mean that we can't work towards something being different, whether it's within ourselves or within our society. But if it's occurring right now, aversion is simply more distraction from being able to stay present and actually doing something about it. And ultimately what that something is to end conflict within our own minds, to unite our mind and our bodies with life as life occurs. The Buddha continues. Skillful is restraint at the body. Skillful is restraint at speech. Skillful is restraint in thought. Restraint in all experiences is skillful. Words of an awakened human being. That's something that this relates to, I can't think of the name of the sutta right now, the first sutta I gave in this series on restraint. A self-referential ego self feels that it's its duty to get as much as it can, to always be looking for more. And as most of us have learned, a self-referential ego self can never be satisfied, can never be satiated. There's never enough. It's always more, more, more. But if we simply learn as a practical measure, restraint, if we can do it in this moment, we're satisfied in this moment, aren't we? If we recognize that I have enough. The Buddha taught that as human beings, he didn't teach that we should live very severe ascetic lives. He lived that life, and he found it to be, his words were painful and ignoble. And he recognized that as human beings, we have four needs. We need food, shelter, clothing, and medicine. But beyond that, trying to pile up our food or our clothing or our shelter or our medicine, we're doing that from a point of view that is rooted in ignorance of the way things are. And so we've lost restraint. At the point of contact with our senses is where we practice restraint. And another way that we talk about that here is when we find ourselves agitated, and that could be any type of agitation. It doesn't necessarily mean we're mad at something or upset or fearful or resentful. We might be elated. At that point is where we practice restraint by saying and reminding ourselves, this is not me. This is not what I am. This is not who I am. This is simply what's occurring. And if we're fortunate in the moment, that's great. And if we can teach ourselves when we're fortunate that this is not me, this is not mine, then when life is unfortunate, we'll be able to stay in that same place. And so then no matter what occurs in life, we will have ingrained restraint at the sixth sense base. Is that clear? And it's simple and practical living, isn't it? It doesn't mean we have to go without, but it doesn't mean that we have to always be grasping either. It means we can learn radical contentment with our life right now. The answer to happiness, isn't it? Restraint in all experiences is skillful. One restrained in the world is free from confusion, delusion, and disappointment. Those who have full control over their hands, their feet, their tongue, are delighted with their understanding. They are well established in meditative absorption, the foundation for all of this, isn't it? The Buddha is referring to the four jhanas, developing that deeper, ever deepening levels of meditative absorption. They are content in solitude, free of entanglements. They are called Dhamma practitioners. Isn't that great? How do you know if you're a Dhamma practitioner if you're doing this? No mystery. Those who have control of their tongue are moderate in speech. Imagine if many of the people in the world today could just practice that one thing, restraint at the tongue. And I'm not just talking about one individual, I'm talking about a lot of people today, isn't it? We feel it's our duty to be speaking out harshly against something that is contrary to what we would like. And I would bet that every one of you could say this, that at least at one point in your life, and if you're like me, probably many times, unfortunately, it was your tongue that caused so much hurt to other people, wasn't it? And I'm thinking back to even when I was a kid saying things to my parents. I wish can't take those things back. You never can. Or even in adulthood, saying things that were terribly hurtful. But in the moment, I felt completely justified. Why? Because that person made me feel this way. Nobody makes you feel. Nobody makes me feel anyway, except the way that I want to feel. And if my thoughts are rooted in ignorance, I'll end up blaming everybody else except myself for how I feel. When the truth of the matter is that if I feel anything less than calm and peaceful, it's because my mind is rooted in ignorance. My thoughts are rooted in ignorance, and it leads to that type of conflict within myself. I was mentioning to Pete earlier today, because we were talking about when we were younger and the difference that the Buddha's teachings has made in our lives. I think I've probably said it here. When I was born, I slapped the doctor. I was pissed. How could you bring me into this room that's so cold with all the lights? Well, my mom said I might have done. The point is, I was angry all through my life, and there was no reason for it. I had a wonderful parents and so brothers and sisters, a wonderful home. We had everything that any person could ever want, well, everything that anybody could need, and a lot of things that I wanted, I got. But I was still angry, and I didn't understand it until I started developing the Eightfold Path. That anger and frustration wasn't because of my environment. It was because of the way that the world was presenting itself to me made no sense at all. How could life be this way? Why are we so competitive? Why do we need to chase after things? Why are people judged on their skin color, their how tall they are, what they own, where they live, who they know? None of it made any sense. I didn't understand it then. I just thought there was something wrong with me. And there was. I was ignorant of the way things truly are. But as I started developing the Eightfold Path, finally, I began slowly to stop judging myself in relation to how the world was making me feel. And that changed everything. That was the beginning of developing at least a measure of a calm and peaceful mind. And that's remarkable. We talked about this, I think, rather in depth on Saturday, too. But we talk about it a lot here. That's worth the price of admission, isn't it? To be able to have control, to own that quality of mind, to understand the value of practicing restraint and end conflict in our own minds, and so with the world too. Those that abide in the Dhamma, who delight in the Dhamma, are mindful of the Dhamma. They do not lose the Dhamma. Why would you lose something that you are taking delight in? Of course, it goes back to mudita, to taking joyful engagement with this Dhamma, this simple and direct way of living in the world without being entangled in the world, without having to react to everything that's occurring in the world, to be our own refuge. Those are the Buddha's final words. Be our own refuge. And how do we do it? We need to develop a way of looking at the world that allows us to take control of our thinking, like the Buddha teaches in the Bhikkhuvaga Sutta, and the Vitakka Sutta. Those free of aversion of what has occurred, let me read that again. Those free of aversion to what has occurred to them and free of craving for what has occurred to others, meaning envy and bitterness, will be able to attain meditative absorption. There's a lot of words to simply say being at peace with yourself and the world around you. Those that are calm, even when receiving little, pure in livelihood and determined in their Dhamma practice, are exalted by the wise. This kind of goes back to something we were talking about. And again, I can't remember the name of the sutta, but using the reference towards other people's skillful or unskillful Dhamma practice as a benchmark of recognizing in ourselves how we should develop the Dhamma. And how should we develop the Dhamma as it's presented to us? That's the underlying theme of this section in the Dhammapada. Those with no clinging to thoughts or feelings, free of regret from what is not present, they are true Dhamma practitioners. Those who abide with compassion for all beings. Notice that line today. Many of us have compassion for some beings, but there's very few people in the world today that have compassion for all beings, particularly the ones they don't agree with. Those who abide in compassion for all beings and devoted to the Dhamma will achieve unbinding, meaning awakening, and the bliss of the cessation of all conditioned thinking. So how do we know if we've completed the path? When we have true compassion for all beings. When we understand the manifestation of ignorance in other people, and we don't insist that they be any different than they are because we understand the nature of ignorance, because we have recognized it and abandoned it in ourselves. And this is an ongoing process. It doesn't mean that we can't be compassionate prior to full awakening. In fact, true compassion is an essential part of the Dhamma, isn't it? And it's reflected in the middle section of the Eightfold Path, right speech, right action, and right livelihood. If you're confused at any time about how can I be compassionate in this moment, maybe to someone who's upsetting us or to a system that's upsetting us, practice right speech, right action, and right livelihood, both in thought, word, and deed, meaning how we're thinking about ourselves in relation to the world. That's developing a mind that is a true refuge, because then our mind is no longer creating conflict for us. And that's up to us. Empty of all conditioned thoughts, free of craving and aversion, they achieve unbinding. Again, the Buddha is referencing emptiness of ignorance here. Abandon the 5 lower fetters of self-referential views, of doubt, of belief in rites and rituals, of lust and of ill will. Abandon conceit, restlessness, and ignorance, and abandon the fetters of craving to establish the self in heavenly realms or formless realms. Let me read that again because it's so important, because it's speaking to using, excuse me, this line here is speaking to using the Dhamma practice to either fix a broken self, which is okay if that's the motivation to get into Dhamma practice, but you have to recognize that that's what you're doing, or to use the Dhamma as an escape from this world by thinking that you can create a better life in another world by your actions now. That may be possible, by the way. The Buddha doesn't discount it, but it's not useful in developing the Dhamma. The Buddha taught a Dhamma for human beings to awaken and enjoy the benefits of that awakening in this life and in this moment, right here, right now, not in the future. And ignorance, and abandon the fetters of craving to establish the self in heavenly realms or formless realms. That also speaks a little bit to the common usage during the Buddhist times of no self, which was a grasping after being in non-physical realms and trying to establish yourself, whether it's in another life or even in a meditation practice. And I've engaged in meditation practices that trick your mind into thinking you're outside of your physical body. And think about that. When it first happened to me, and I can remember very clearly where I was and when it happened and how it happened. I was in Hawaii in this on the island of Kauai, out in a little tent in the middle of the rainforest, doing this ritual. And it was the most remarkable thing that ever happened. Now I look back on that and I see, what value is it to escape my body? I want to learn how to live in this world first. And if I'm out of my body, I'm not in this world, am I? And of course, it wasn't a real experience, but the person was an NLP practitioner and really a master hypnotist. And so they created a ritual. There was about 16 of us on this. I don't even want to call it a retreat. But she convinced all of us to do this thing. She was very, very powerful in the words she used. But there was no benefit to that. Think about that. What good is it? If every moment in my life I have this tool, and I could teach every one of you to do this right now, that I have this tool that I can escape my body. Where am I? I'm in my body. What good is it to leave it? The Buddha's Dhamma is to unite the mind and the body with what's occurring, with no aversion to take you out of that, to objectify your experience and leave your body. And we do that all the time, by the way. Cultivate the skillful faculties of conviction, persistence, refined mindfulness, concentration, and wisdom. That's referring to the Eightfold Path. Overcoming the fetters. The fetters means to be bound to something. Overcoming the fetters. One has crossed to the far shore of lasting peace and happiness. The Dhamma is often referred to as crossing to the other shore. And the other shore is the shore of awakening. We've left samsara behind. The Buddha continues, develop concentration through meditation. Do not be mindless and allow your mind to be distracted by sensual pleasure. Excuse me. I love this line. The world's bait is like a red hot ball of iron. Do not swallow it and then cry how painful it is. But it's true, isn't it? How often have we been taken in by the world and what the world is saying, or because our minds aren't seeing things clearly, that these are the things that we need to be happy. And it ends up being like a red hot ball of iron in our gut. We did it to ourselves through grasping after things that are completely unnecessary. The world's bait is like a red hot ball of iron. Do not swallow it and then cry how painful it is. There is no concentration for those that fail to develop insight. And the Buddha's teaching is to very specific insight into impermanence, the not self characteristic, and the resulting dukkha. There is no concentration for those that fail to develop insight. There is no insight for those that fail to develop concentration. What's the meditation method that we use?
Shamatha-Vipassana.
Quieting the mind to gain insight. And I can't remember the sutta's names though tonight for some reason, getting old. The Buddha taught that a proper meditation practice includes both of those components. Quieting the mind, a method for quieting the mind, leading to insight, and again, a very specific insight into the three marks of existence. And it's often not on our cushions that we gain that insight, or it occurs in such a subtle way that we don't catch it, but it is by deepening our concentration and taking that well-concentrated mind off our cushion, integrating the Eightfold Path, that we're able to understand the impermanence of all things and the not self characteristic, which simply means recognizing views that no longer serve us as awakening human beings, views rooted in ignorance of Four Noble Truths. And as we do that, then that third mark of human existence, the reason why it's called the three marks of existence is every human being carries that mark. Everyone has this problem. As we develop an understanding of the impermanence of all things and a self-rooted in wrong views, we no longer contribute to that third mark of existence of dukkha. That's describing the awakening process, isn't it? It doesn't mean that impermanence ends for an awakened human being. It simply means that that person is no longer rooted in views that do not constitute a self. The word anatta, not a self. And so since those views are no longer rooted in ignorance of what a self is, there's no contribution towards suffering. That person has emptied themselves of ignorance. Simple and direct process. Not easy at times, but it's simple and direct. Those who have developed through the Eightfold Path concentration and insight in tandem are close to Nibbana. They're close to awakening. Those who abide in solitude, free of worldly entanglements, with a calm mind, who understand the Dhamma through tranquility and insight, Shamatha-Vipassana, in them arises delight that transcends all human delight. We talk about another subject, that when we start recognizing and abandoning all these views that we use to describe a self to a self, wrong views, it feels like annihilation. I'm letting go of all the things that I'm delighting in, and I feel that I need to be happy. But the Buddha is teaching us that there's a more lasting and realistic delight that's beyond worldly sensory pleasures. True delight. And it's delight that's rooted in understanding of the way things are. It's a delight that brings true meaning to any moment in life, no matter what's occurring. And it's delightful simply because we're present for it. The scenario, what's occurring, is really unimportant. But there is such delight and meaning in simply being present for your life as your life unfolds, moment by moment by moment. That's a mind united in a body. That's a mind that has developed a common peaceful mind and has gained and integrated insight into the three marks of existence. That is rooted in restraint. Those that see with true insight the rise and fall of all conditioned things and of the five clinging aggregates, they are full of joy and lasting peace and happiness. This is called the deathless state. Again, getting to the mystical teachings of modern Buddhism, of achieving the deathless state, which is often portrayed as somehow you live forever, whether it's incarnate or disincarnate. The deathless state is simply a state where we're not giving birth to another moment rooted in ignorance. Our delight, our mindfulness, doesn't end. It doesn't die. It continues from one moment to the next. That's an awakened mind. That's a mind that is resting, as the Buddha described an awakened mind, as a calm and peaceful mind, resting in equanimity. It stays calm and peaceful no matter what's occurring. And when I say we learn how to be at peace with less than peaceful mind states, that's what I'm referring to. It doesn't mean that our minds are not appropriately engaged with what's occurring. If a car rolls down the hill and lands into a building across the street, we don't sit here like fools. We'll get up and we'll probably do something. We'll be helpful about that, but we'll do it from a calm and peaceful mind. We won't be reacting to things. We'll be able to function at a much more effective level than when we're distracted by the need for something to be different. The Buddha continues. Restraint of the senses, contentment in the Dhamma, and restraint of unskillful behavior, these form the foundation of a well-integrated life, meaning a life well integrated with the Eightfold Path. Associate with those who are engaged in the noble search, who have passion for the true Dhamma, who are pure in thought, word, and deed, who are pleasant and refined in their behavior, full of joy, unbinding will occur. The Buddha speaking to our sangha, he must have saw this occurring. Mm-hmm. Really, because that's what we do here. And we do, I mean, it's remarkable to me sitting in this seat, the joy that we each take in each other as we're developing the Dhamma. It really is wonderful to see. I mean, I think you all see that. You all experience that. You all take great pleasure, great mudita in that. That's remarkable. This is a wonderful line. Just as a jasmine creeper sheds its withered flowers, so should you shed greed, aversion, and deluded thinking. Well, when you want to, when you understand it. Those well composed, calm and pleasant in thought, word, and deed, free of worldly entanglements, can be truly known as serene. Look at the simple terms that the Buddha is describing awakening. It's nothing that is not a. Does anybody think that we can achieve a serene countenance about ourselves? It's a human quality, isn't it? We're human beings. It's only a mind rooted in ignorance and lack and not practicing restraint at the sixth sense base that isn't serene. Why? Because it's not practicing restraint. It's grasping. It's craving. It's desiring something to be different than it is, whether it's more or less of something. It is by self-understanding that one can scrutinize themselves and restrain themselves. With a sixth sense base well guarded with refined mindfulness, one will always live in peace and happiness. Remember, the Buddha is using an awakened monk as the example of this. Be your own protector. Be your own refuge. What other refuge could there be? Now think about that. This is an awakened human being teaching others. You don't take refuge in me. You can take refuge in the Dhamma. You can take refuge in the idea that I'm a human being and I awaken. But the true refuge is within you. It's by fully integrating the Eightfold Path. And once we own that, I'm using the word ownership because when you own something, it's yours, isn't it? Nobody can take it away unless you decide to give it away. Once we own our awakening, nothing can take it away. It's like that question that was asked a couple of years ago now. Why would the Buddha keep meditating after he awakened? Why wouldn't he? Because now we have that true refuge within us. The Buddha continues, full of, the last line, I almost missed it. Restrain yourself as a rider restrains his horse. What a good visual, isn't it? Hold back. We don't have to always be grasping after things. The Buddha continues. Full of joy and conviction in the Dhamma, the peaceful state is developed and conditioned thinking ends, meaning thinking rooted in ignorance of Four Noble Truths. Those that develop the Dhamma illuminate the entire world as a bright moon free of clouds. That's the end of that section of the Dhammapada, the end of that sutta. Bright moon. What do you think?
That's a lot.
It's a lot. But it all points to practicing restraint, ending conflict in our minds, and so in the world around us, as best as that will happen, and living a life of peace and happiness. That's what the Dhamma is about. It's not about anything else. And we mentioned this a little bit earlier before class. That almost sounds like it's not enough. Why would I want to do that? But when you look at all human struggles, is to position ourselves where we feel safe and calm and at peace. But when that pursuit is rooted in greed, aversion, and deluded thinking, it never can result in that. And I don't mean this to be political, but it's such a good example. We have a man who has billions and billions of dollars, and I doubt he's very serene right now. And again, I don't mean, this is not anything negative about him. I don't mean to get into that. But think about that. And we all know people like that. And I don't want to get into a long list of people that seemingly had it made, but yet they had no calm or peaceful mind about them. The Buddha's Dhamma takes us directly there, no matter what the conditions are outside of us. If we're free of the entanglements with the world, free of the need for anything to be any different than it is, including ourselves in this moment, we have developed nibbana. We have escaped ignorance. We have emptied ourselves of ignorance. And it's simply through the Eightfold Path. It's up to us to do that, though. The Buddha reminds us here in this sutta. When he talked about himself, he always referred to himself as a rightly self-awakened one who taught others to do the same. So we're not relying on someone to bestow awakening on us because we're so wonderful that we did enough for this and enough of that. It doesn't matter how many rites and rituals we engage in, how often we bow down or anything else, how many candles we light, anything. Awakening has to do with how well we engage in right effort and develop the entire Eightfold Path as the framework for living our life. And isn't that remarkable? We can do it ourselves. That's what really got me excited, finally, after many, many years of so-called Buddhist study, when I finally understood that. It's not up to all these other things that I was doing and taught that I needed to do. It's up to me in my meditation practice and integrating an Eightfold Path. And even then, I can remember when I first had that thought, I didn't understand what an Eightfold Path was. In fact, like many of you, it took me a while just to remember the words that describe the Eightfold Path, right view, etc. We all went through that, right? What is it? You couldn't really remember? It's only 8 words, isn't it? But they're hard to remember at first. And then, but once we remember it, then we can start integrating it. And once we start integrating it, then we can live from the point of right view and practice right intention when it's appropriate, right speech, right action, right livelihood. We are reminded of engaging in ongoing right effort. We learn what refined mindfulness is, and we've learned what right meditation is. And it becomes part of our life. And I would bet that everyone here has done that, haven't you? So, except Elizabeth. But you will if you continue to integrate the Eightfold Path as the path to awakening. I think it was 3 classes I gave tonight, but that's enough. I'm going to end with that. But is there any questions related directly to what I talked about tonight? We'll go around. Lorna, good to see you tonight.
Thank you. Good to be here. Thank you for your talk.
My pleasure.
On Saturday, we had the pleasure of having Matt in our sangha, and he was saying that it was describing trying to see the problem of, how we get entangled with the world. And he was saying that if we kind of like see past it, which I kind of got at the time when he was describing, if you see past it, and then that enables you to see it more clearly, which I kind of got at the time when he was describing it. And I kind of like got the feeling of what he was meaning. And whenever you do that, whenever you look back, it's always a fabrication.
Always. Yep.
Always a fabrication.
Yep.
That is giving you an uneasy mind. And so I found last Saturday's class, and it followed that through with Qigong. We did Qigong as well. So it kind of like expanded on it a little bit, and so I thought I got a lot out of last Saturday, a lot out of last Saturday's morning here. And then you've been talking about restraint tonight, which we are asked to look at and be mindful of our minds regarding restraint and the sixth sense base, through the sixth sense base, which is how we've been asked to look at it through by the Buddha. I think that's in a way evolving itself in my mind, that when I go out of these 4 walls and I get out into society and caught up in phenomena like we all do, I think I feel like the outside of phenomena doesn't come to me like it used to do.
Yeah.
It's not that I'm really trying to, I'm like some wonderful Buddhist woman who can think of the sixth sense, your six senses all the time, and I'm working away at it. It's not like that. It's that I feel that society and all that's outside doesn't sort of come to and disrupt my mind like it used to do. It's a hard thing to describe, but that's the best I can describe it. And then tonight's sutta, I was sitting at home and read it yesterday afternoon, and when I was reading it, it reminded me when you go into a bookstore, like say Barnes and Noble or something, you often see these little books, maybe they're about 5 to 5 with a few pages in, and there's a little saying in each page, maybe about 2 or 3 sentences, and that's sort of like you're saying. When you read through them in Barnes and Noble, they never really quite fit, because we are so attuned to how what we're learning here. We're kind of like attuned to it. So when you sort of read somebody else's passages, they never really quite fit how we think about it. But the sutta, when I was reading the suttas yesterday afternoon, how the suttas laid out, it's laid out in, there's actually 26, because I counted them, 26 paragraphs, separate paragraphs, each pointing to restraint, but each kind of with a different theme of the same problem, looking at the same topic, but with a different theme behind it. And you could almost sort of make a little booklet of it, like in Barnes and Noble, you could just have like one paragraph on each page and just read one paragraph, because there's so much, it's so rich. Just one paragraph is so rich with its understanding. And it's just so wholesome that you could just hold it in mind for a while throughout your day, just sort of, and you could keep it in your car or keep it in your desk or something like that, where you could just refer to it in your own private time, something, just to sort of reflect you back to all this that we're to talk about. So when I was reading yesterday afternoon, I looked at the sutta in that way, that each paragraph is a complete passage of itself, not part of a sutta, but it was complete and rich and wholesome in itself, even though there's only 3 or 4 lines to it sometimes. It was just so wonderful.
Thank you. Wow, you said a lot. I should point out the Dhammapada itself is 99%, 98% in verse, including this part, and you could kind of feel that in it. But my retranslation is obviously in prose, but just because it's a little easier to teach without the cadence of that it was originally written in. But yeah, each little section is so much. And, if I had another 100 years to keep writing, I probably would start writing these little books. But I don't. You described being disentangled from the world beautifully, because that's what it feels like. It's occurring, but you're no longer attached to it. It's just there. You haven't objectified, meaning you haven't put yourself into what's there. It's just what's there. That's the essence of a good Buddha woman. But that's what it feels like, and isn't it wonderful? Life goes on. It's not affecting me one way or the other, and I haven't lost the ability for wise discernment. In fact, I've gained the ability for wise discernment, and I know when to act and when not to act. Do something, and my mind stays at peace. Thank you, Ron. Good to see you tonight.
Good to hear. Yeah, I like that idea of turning it into a little calendar. It's a bit, to me, it was a bit overwhelming to go through it and just getting to grasp the one paragraph and then the next thing comes in. To spread them out over days or months, it gives you a lot more.
Yeah. It is a lot. It probably take, we could break it down. It probably could be 10 classes in here, just take a little section. But that's true about most of the Buddha's teachings, isn't it? There's just so much in there, because they all encompass, for the most part, a complete teaching on the Dhamma. It's just a different situational approach to it.
Right. And a lot of them, though, it takes like one part of it, pieces it out.
Yeah.
Here, it's from start to finish.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A lot to consider.
There's a lot to consider.
But it also clearly describes what an integrated Eightfold Path Dhamma practice is.
Mhm.
This is what it looks like. This is how we do it. And with a few important cautions, creating something other than what it is through rites and rituals, etc.
I think I've gotten past most of that. I've seen the emphasis on restraint. Lately, I've been wondering in my dealings with other people, engaged enough. I tend to withdraw a little bit from contact with people, but I've noticed that when I do engage with people, it's always very easy. There's not much conflict there. Not too much conflict with the people, but conflict within myself. Should I not?
Yeah.
But I do see people kind of looking at me a little strangely that I'm not more engaged with them. It's an odd little thing to be in the world and not in it.
That's an aspect of not being entangled in those things.
Mhm.
Yeah, and people look at me strangely too for a reason. But some of it is people expect a reaction from other people because that's typically what they get. And when they don't get a reaction from you, it's like, what's wrong here?
Mm-hmm.
And there's all types of there's all different ways to share the Dhamma, and it doesn't always mean that we have to constantly be engaged in the world. I'm thinking of one of the great monks during the Buddhist time was Kassapa, Mahakassapa, and he spent, even though he was awakened for the great majority of his time with the Buddha, he came into the Buddha's life very early, so he had 42 or 43 years as an awakened person during the Buddha's lifetime. But he spent most of his life in seclusion, and he only came out of seclusion when the Buddha called him and said, for a very specific reason, I need you to go here and tell that person this because you're good at it. But he preferred to live in seclusion. That was fine. Disentangled from the world. Good to see you. Mike, good to see you tonight. How are you?
I'm well, thanks. Enjoyed your talk very much. Realize I've got my work cut out for me. I'm not discouraged, but I've gotten kind of a bit more context. I'm trying to assess the level of detachment or disentanglement that I need to undertake from a lot of activities that I have to get to where I want to go, and I'm finding it challenging. I've tried to try to avoid the news, try to stay off social media, and I watched a documentary the other day, which had a real happy ending. It was nice, and it depressed the hell out of me. And not because it had a happy ending, but because of how easily it could have been an awful ending. Long story short, it was a guy who was accused of murder, and he happened to be at a public place when it happened. And by incredible luck, he was caught on film at that place. But otherwise, there was circumstantial evidence that would have had him very likely. And so I'm like saying to myself, all right, so I avoided the news, all the real world stuff, and social media. And then I watched this, and everything's getting a rise out of me on one level or another. And so I guess I'm aware of it, which is a good thing, but it's a challenge.
That awareness is the beginning, though. You first have to. That's the beginning of the ending of ignorance. You first have to recognize. And one thing I should say that you can't force restraint. and you can't, if you try to change too quickly, especially when you haven't fully integrated the Eightfold Path, there's going to be a lot of stress there. So it's best to just continue with Dhamma practice as best you can. And most of this stuff that we disentangle ourselves from happens naturally, and so it doesn't contribute. That's not to say always. Sometimes there's some obvious things that you have to, just using myself as an example, I couldn't have gotten anywhere if I hadn't forcefully stopped drinking and drugging. That was something you take a positive stand on.
Right.
But a lot of the development of our understanding of ourselves in relation to the world, a lot of a calm and peaceful mind is simply a matter of continuing with the Dhamma. Being peaceful with how we are right now, knowing that there's a little more to do. There could be some grasping if we decide, I got to be awakened by Thursday at 8:00. You're going to be in trouble because it's probably not going to happen. But if you understand that this is it, this is what you can do, and it takes some time. It really doesn't matter how much time it takes, does it? Because you're on the right path, the Eightfold Path. Glad you're here, Frank.
I have to have Eric awake by 3 a.m. He's got to hurry up and
Well,
awaken.
I
I just wanted to say good night.
got anything else you want to say? You don't have to, but
I'm just glad to be here.
Yeah.
Yes.
yeah, always good to see you, Eric. So, and you too, Frank. So thank.
I just wanted to say that for me, there's a real thin line between tolerate something, and to practice restraint.
Yes.
To be able
Wow.
to tolerate something, be able to practice restraint.
Yeah, that's
Because when I have a craving arise or an aversion to something, I have to tolerate my discomfort or my hurt or my desire for something enough to be able to have a cause to restrain myself.
Yeah. Very good. Thank you for saying that. Good night, Frank. Good night, Eric. Good to see you. See you guys soon. Very good to see you.
Good to see you. Like we've been talking about, this was very instructional. I'm someone who's more kind of piggybacking off of what you were just saying. I'm someone who's more outgoing, but I realized, like the first time I heard a sutta on restraint a couple summers ago, I knew that it had to be organic and natural, my approach to it. Otherwise, I'd be sitting there like bursting.
Yeah.
And so I think that's, and that's also when it takes hold and is, forever changed as a behavioral concept, I think. When it happens naturally, you're in a situation, you recognize that restraint occurred, and it's occurring because of your practice, and your practice is leading you concentration. So that allows it to happen organically, and then when it does, it's there, and you're kind of on your way. So it's almost as if you don't have to do anything except, as we always say, return to your practice.
Yeah.
And I think it does start to unfold, quite naturally. Because I think people would notice if something felt, forced or not natural. But anyway, I thought there was a lot in the sutta. I look forward to going back to review it again, both in listening to it and reading it again. I think there's so much valuable stuff in there that's relevant to, some things that I'm thinking about or trying to disentangle from. And I guess like every sutta, I feel like it speaks the truth.
Mhm.
It is there, and it's mine to learn and integrate and understand further. So, I mean, I hope that makes sense. It's just like it's so true, and therefore, like that's part of the joyful engagement. That is so true.
Yeah.
I can't wait to engage further in that and live that way more frequently. So just
Thank you. That's true conviction, isn't it? Because rooted in an understanding of what you're gaining from this. I think that word organic is better than even natural, because it's an organic process. We don't grasp after it. We don't think that we should be this way, or you recognize when you're not practicing restraint. And as every time you recognize it and come back to what's occurring, it just develops. Thank you. David, good to see you tonight.
I think the organic aspect of it is when you are showing restraint that has come because of your practice, you do notice that when you're showing restraint, you don't feel that aversion or greed that you want it back, or delusion. And that's all the hindrances. You live those things and you notice that they pass much quickly, or they just don't occur. And I think that can only come from a steady diet of practice. So I think if I could make my daughter do one thing, is just to slowly build into it and get past my mind's too busy. That would be what I would pass on to my daughters.
Yeah, and you said you think, but I would say, not to put words in your mouth, you know, because you had that experience of going from I did, just to use the word, it's probably not the perfect word, but an uncontrolled mind to a mind that is developing quite a measure of peace. And it's simply by taking to the Dhamma as it's presented, isn't it? That's being I like the word, an organic example of the Dhamma, by simply doing it.
And see for yourself.
Yeah, come and see for yourself. It's the only way. Thank you so much. Elizabeth, please don't feel like you have to comment, but please feel free to say anything you'd like.
I think it's exciting. I feel like I've watched both my parents go through this, and my dad. So I don't know. I think it's exciting seeing them like still growing. There's so much more to do even after your youth and your young adult life. So I think it's exciting. I agree with whenever they came home and told me something about what you said, I never did agree with it, or would say I like pushed it aside, but I feel like it all makes sense to me. It's like logical. And I'm curious.
Great. Well, thank you for saying that. And it is, usually people as old as your mom and dad don't change. Most people stop, they get to a certain emotional age, maybe around 17, 18, 19, maybe a little bit later, but not much. And they simply stop growing because they stop changing. And your old parents, boy, I'm much older than they are. So. But isn't that remarkable that there's something to discover about life, no matter where you are. And that's such an exciting thing about the Dhamma. Your parents are both great guidance in developing the Dhamma, but I would say, and I said it to them when they first came here, is to be very, very gentle with yourself, always. If you're going to start a meditation practice, start with short periods, maybe 5 minutes at a time, and gradually build. That's just how they did it. Slowly integrate the Eightfold path, and I hope you continue to come to be part of our sangha. That's really the most important thing. I think you know about my website, that there's guided meditations that you can download and listen to. But again, be gentle with yourself, Elizabeth. Take your time. But I think very quickly you'll see and feel and experience the benefits of a well-concentrated mind. Glad you're here tonight. Bonnie, good to see you.
Stepping forward. Opening up your view.
Wow. Great wisdom there. It is. A little bit at a time. Thank you, Bonnie. Liz, good to see you.
Good to see you. I was just thinking about what Mike was saying about areas that he's able to show restraint in, which is a really positive thing.
Yeah.
And then to just, like you had said a moment ago, to just, you know, we could all just cut ourselves a break, you know, be gentle with ourselves and not beat ourselves up about, you know, maybe feeling like we're not doing enough. I mean, we're all enough.
Yeah.
All enough.
Yeah.
So that's
Boy, thank you. Great wisdom there too. You know, we can't be more than we are right now. That's why we need to be gentle with ourselves. It doesn't mean that we're not going to grow and change and learn things and discover the true nature of reality. But that's rooted, it's founded in accepting who we are right here, right now, in this present moment. Like I always say that saying that if you're in New York and you want to get to Chicago, but you think you're in Los Angeles, you'll never get there. We have to be okay with who we are, that we have to learn a little bit. Think about this, Mike, that because you brought yourself here tonight and you listened to the words of an awakened human being from 2,600 years ago, you now have another piece in the puzzle of developing your own calm and peaceful mind. And that's just how it worked for all of us. And you hear me say this over and over. To me, the most remarkable thing in my life, and I've had a lot of remarkable things happen to me. Not that it's anything special, but we all do. But that these teachings are still here. And they're still work. They're still useful and effective. And they're really basically simple. But it does take some ongoing effort, doesn't it? Great class. A few quick announcements. We are, I think I mentioned it last week, until around Labor Day, we're taking a collection up to contribute towards a sign for the Rare Art and Learning Cooperative. They need a road sign. And you know, obviously, as a startup, they don't have a lot of money. So anything we can contribute is going to be greatly appreciated by Mary Beth and Scott and all of those. It's just a wonderful school. I've been there twice now. It's a great thing. And then our Donna dinner is on this Tuesday of Thanksgiving week, and we'll talk more about that as it gets closer. And our retreat is a month away, our next retreat. So, and there's still room if anybody can go. I know that you have some plans and stuff. Looking forward to that. And I think that's it. Okay, we'll finish as we always do with the Karaniya Metta Sutta. So again, find your relaxed meditation posture. And gently close your eyes and gently close your mouths. And again, take a moment to become mindful of your in-breath and your out-breath. And these are the Buddha's words on metta from the Karaniya Metta Sutta. This is what should be done by one who is skilled in goodness and who knows the path of peace. Let them be able and upright, straightforward and gentle in speech, humble and not conceited, contented and easily satisfied, unburdened with duties and frugal in their ways, peaceful and calm and wise and skillful, not proud or demanding in nature. Let them not do the slightest thing that the wise would later reprove. Wishing, in gladness and in safety, may all beings be at ease. Whatever living beings there may be, whether they are weak or strong, omitting none, the great or the mighty, medium, short, or small, the seen and the unseen, those living near and far away, those born and to be born, may all beings be at ease. Let none deceive another or despise any being in any state. Let none through anger or ill will wish harm upon another. Even as a mother protects with her life her child, her only child, so with a boundless heart should one cherish all living beings. Radiating kindness over the entire world, spreading upwards to the skies and downwards to the depths, outwards and unbounded, freed from hatred and ill will. Whether standing or walking, seated or lying down, free from drowsiness, one should sustain this recollection. This is said to be the sublime abiding. By not holding to fixed views, the pure-hearted one, having clarity of vision, being freed from all sense desires, is not born again into this world. Thank you all for a wonderful class tonight. Peace.